Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be in the world, and welcome to the first session of the penultimate afternoon of the 2020 FIPP Congress and Digital Innovators Summit. We are live once again from the Kenton Theatre here in Henley, as we have been all month, to bring you this afternoon's session. Digital subscriptions and paywalls are rapidly emerging as the primary revenue driver for many media businesses, tying in as they do with the general boom in direct-to-consumer subscriptions initiated by services like Netflix. Within this, newspapers have been the first to move towards insisting that readers pay for the content they're consuming, with the magazine industry currently trailing in their wake and showing few signs of mass adoption. In 2018, we at FIPP decided to monitoring the key trends in this space, and in collaboration with our partner CeleraOne, we launched the global digital subscription Snapshot. It was an instant success and was so well received that we immediately increased its frequency from annual to quarterly. It's now on its 8th edition, and through the Snapshot, we've been able to build up a picture of the evolution of the digital subscriptions industry. Today's session sees the launch of that 8th edition. Links to download the report are in the chat, and you can also visit fipp.com if you're watching this on catch up to download it. And I'm delighted to be joined by two guests to discuss the findings of the latest edition. My first guest is Walterscheid, the MD of CeleraOne, the market leader for paywalls. They work with almost all of the leading newspapers across Germany, Austria, and Switzerland, including Zeit, Bild, and Die Welt, and are now starting to expand rapidly in other parts of the world too. And my second guest is Marc, Chief Revenue Officer at Tamedia, the largest media group in Switzerland, where he is responsible for, among many other things, their group-wide paywall strategy. So Jörg and Marc, welcome. But before we hear from our guests, I'm going to give you a brief overview of the key findings of the latest report. And of course, please don't forget to ask questions, both of me and of our guests, which you can do via the event portal or through the Zoom chat. So let's start now by having a quick look at the latest figures. If we could share the screen and get the presentation up, we can have a look at that. So I'm going to start with a question, with a discussion really of methodology, as we always do in these situations. The first is to say that there is at the moment no consistent standard for reporting digital subscriptions. We take our data from a wide variety of sources, and you should be aware, as a kind of health warning around it, that it may have been calculated or formulated in different ways by different publishers. We do our best to dedupe the data. We do our best to strip out the impact of things like e-reader editions, but overall there is no consistent standard at the moment for measuring. The second is that digital and print bundles are treated differently by different publishers. So that's another thing to be wary of. And finally, of course, there is no way of linking subscription to readership. We don't yet have any measurement of how active any of these subscribers actually are. The measurement of pricing is also very, very difficult. We use a wide variety of techniques to try and get the correct pricing in the report, but publishers do use a wide variety of pricing strategies, and we try to give you as many of these as possible. But of course, we rely on the pricing that we can see, and it is only a guide. We do also use a VPN to look at the price from different countries and around the world to try and give you a kind of average view of what it is. So if we could have the next slide, please. Now, these are some common complaints that we get. They're also in the report from publishers. My figures are wrong. That happens quite a lot. My competitor doesn't actually have that many subscribers, and why haven't you included me? If you fall into any of these categories, then please do contact us. The report relies on you providing us with information. We do, of course, take information from publicly available sources as well, but one of the best sources of information is you, the publishers yourselves. A great many of you are already in direct contact with our author, Marius, providing him with correct figures on a quarterly basis. If you would like to be included in the report, if you would like to increase the accuracy of the figures in the report, then please do contact Marius. You can get in touch with us, info@fipp.com, to add your numbers to the next edition. So let's look very quickly on the next slide at the types of paywalls that are included in this report. Just a very brief refresher, a reminder that paywall is not a one-size-fits-all term, that there are a great many varieties, all of which are reflected in the data that you see in this report. Anything ranging from hard paywalls right the way through to dynamic ones. I'm not going to run through all the different types that are there. You can, of course, look at that after the session when you get a copy of these slides. But just to be aware that there are at least 6 different types of membership model or subscription model being captured in these reports, and you should be mindful of which of those is applicable to the brand that you're looking at. So let's move on and look now at the top 10 by volume in the latest edition of the report and very briefly run through those. The full report runs to something like 60 or 70 titles, so I'm not going to go through all of them in detail. We're just going to pick out some highlights. And of course, the first highlight is the top 10. And the top 10 is topped, as ever, by the New York Times. It's been a consistent leader in this space since we launched the report. I'm going to go into the New York Times' data in a bit more detail a bit later on, so I'm not going to spend too much time on that, other than to draw your attention to the 14% period-on-period change, which is quite an important number to keep in mind when you're looking at all of the other data in the report. You will see that for each entry here, we have the country, we have the name of the newspaper or title that's involved, we have the number of subscribers that's been reported, we have the reporting period, the source, so that you can go back and check yourself where the data originated from, the change over the last period, and a measure of pricing, which, as I said earlier, is taken from our best efforts to get that. So very quickly looking at the top 10 and picking out a few highlights, I would highlight, of course, the New York Times, but also the Wall Street Journal, which interestingly has reported no change in its figures in the most recent quarter. Whether that reflects some kind of slowdown with people not being in offices as a result of COVID, we're not sure. The Informer at number 3, for those of you not familiar, the Informer is a paid title from a US computer game retail chain. Very incredible success story, really, of a magazine being launched by a retail chain, has now got 2.1 million paid subscribers. The Washington Post, a little bit of an enigma in these figures. They are very, very reluctant to report figures. They certainly don't report their figures regularly or accurately, so we've had to take a wide variety of sources to get this number. At the moment, they're not making a big splash about any large increase in subscriber numbers. We know that there must have been one, but we can't tell quite yet what it is. The New York Times, the Financial Times, my apologies, at 1.1 million, not reported a change in this period. One title that has reported a change in this period with a surprising increase is The Athletic. The Athletic is now up to 1 million subscribers in the most recent report, up from 600,000 last time. I think that's a quite incredible performance when you think that we've been through 6 months with very little sport. The Athletic is a sports-based subscription title. Then we have The Guardian, perennial top 10 occupants from the UK. That's a combination of their membership and subscription numbers. Going back to what we were saying earlier about the different types of paywall, The Guardian is, of course, a membership model, slightly different from some of the others on here. Nevertheless, their figures are worth reporting. Then we have Nikkei, who's been on that list for a long time, The Economist app, which is a combination of their legacy app and their new one, and then a fast rising publisher here in China, Caixin, who are now reporting more than 500,000 digital subscribers in the first half of this year. Then another new innovation for this year is groups. These were previously included in the overall list. We've now split them out separately. These are newspaper or media groups that report their figures collectively. We've endeavored to take the same approach to reporting these as we have to individual titles. I won't go through them one by one, other than to highlight the fact that one of our guests today, Tamedia, is on that list now with a new entry. Thank you very much to them for providing their details, and we're going to dig a little bit more into that a bit later on with Marc. But you can see on there, and I think really a crucial message that we always give from the digital subscription snapshot, that the phenomenon of digital subscriptions and paywalls is a global phenomenon. You will see a wide variety of countries listed on there. There is not a country on earth where this model is not working. So if we could go on to the next slide, we'll look very quickly at the new entries in this report, because there's some quite interesting brands starting to show up in there. Aside from the diversity of countries, which we mentioned before, and you'll see on that list that there are entries there from Canada, Sweden, New Zealand, the US, of course, but Spain, France, a variety of other countries listed in the report, of course. One of the other things to note is that some of those brands are now non-traditional news media brands. I'm thinking about brands like Slate. So Slate Plus is on there for the first time. In the main report, we have Quartz. But if I just pick out a few highlighted figures from here, the top one is absolutely the key highlight, The Atlantic. The Atlantic's paywall had a very troubled birth. They had to pause the project for a while, where they went back to the drawing board and thought about it. Clearly, that is worth it. they've reported their first set of figures now. They've got to the phenomenal figure of 500,000 digital subscriptions in a very short space of time, which really is a vindication of the work that they've put in to that project. Other brands on there, Business Insider, pure play digital brand, owned by CeleraOne's parent company, Axel Springer, in the US, reporting 200,000 subscriptions. We also have L'Equipe, Globe and Mail, Expressen, Mail Plus in the UK, which is the Daily Mail's digital subscription arm, the notable Spanish newspaper El País, or newspapers, El País and El Mundo, and then from the US, the Dallas Morning News. So a good, healthy collection of new entries to the report. It's growing all the time. If we go to the next slide and look at the fastest growing entries, or rather the changes that we've seen since the last report, excluding the New York Times. I mentioned earlier The Athletic, but other ones to highlight on there, The Guardian showing a 20% growth since the last time it reported, which was about a year ago. The London Times, 2.7%. The Telegraph, astonishing figures for the Telegraph, 18% growth period on period. That's quarter on quarter. They added 45,000 subscriptions in a single quarter, which is really the standout figure for a single quarter here. And some good growth figures as well being shown by Bild Plus and Welt Plus, LA Times, and some of the others that you can find in the report. But the one thing I wanted to highlight there, if we just go back 1 second, is the impact of COVID. And if you look at particularly the Telegraph's figure and you combine that with what we saw from the New York Times, you can see that there's been a significant bump for a number of newspapers in their digital subscriptions numbers quarter on quarter. That's something we're going to explore with Marc a bit later. And of course with York, with his view across the entire market. If we go to the next slide, you can see that very, very clearly with the New York Times' numbers. These are the digital subscriptions numbers in volume in blue and revenue in orange for the New York Times since the second quarter of 2017. You can see that over that period, their average quarterly growth has been about 7.5%. You will remember from my very first slide when I showed you the top 10 in volume that in this quarter, they've reported 14% quarterly growth. So in other words, their growth has doubled in the first true quarter of reporting coronavirus results, and that's a benchmark for the rest of us. One other thing to note, or two other things to note there. The first is that that's the highest quarterly growth they've had since the first quarter of 2017. The second is that their yield has been entirely consistent throughout. You'll see that the growth curves are both pretty much identical. There is no narrowing of the gap between the two, and that means that the yield that they're able to achieve from their digital subscription numbers is consistent and that their growth is not coming as a result of price cutting. On to the next slide. This is a graph that we produce regularly, which tries to measure the impact of price on volume. You can see that there is still no pattern emerging from this. There is no suggestion that the lower the price, the higher the volume. It is still too early, I think, in the process of paywalls and digital subscriptions to measure that. But this is just a little check that we do every so often to make sure that that is the case. And then if we move on to the final couple of slides, the first one, putting the market into context, the digital subscription snapshot for the first time a couple of editions ago started reporting on VOD and music services. We've continued to do that. We see in there some fantastic numbers from companies like Netflix reporting, I think, 10 million new subscribers in the quarter. Again, another coronavirus bump. And this really is about putting our market, the publishing market, into context and showing what the potential still is of the publishing industry in digital subscriptions. Netflix approaching 200 million subscribers, Spotify approaching 150 million subscribers, and you will see across the breadth of those services a wide variety of countries and markets represented. And right at the bottom, at the right-hand side, is the biggest player in our space, the New York Times, which barely registers compared to some of those giants. So still an enormous amount of work that we can do, still an enormous amount of untapped potential versus audio and video. Just finally, some quick recommendations from us for implementing a paywall. There is a paywall how-to guide on FIPP.com, which you can download. Of course, you can also go to CeleraOne. York and his team will give you all of the steps that you need for implementing the paywall. We're going to explore this a little bit with Marc in a minute, but basically you have to make sure that you have content that is worth paying for. Sounds very obvious, but you'd be amazed how many people don't realize that. You have to have some kind of data-driven CRM and customer lifecycle management process. Your organization has to be aligned. We hear that consistently. Organizations that are aligned behind the goal of digital subscriptions do better. You have to get the right technology, which of course includes CeleraOne. You have to think of the user holistically, make the user experience absolutely impeccable, and try to bring as many of your print subscribers with you. So that's a very quick whistle-stop 10-minute tour of the latest set of results. And we're going to jump now, if we can stop the screen sharing, to our guests, to Marc and to York. Welcome, gentlemen. Thank you very much for coming along today. I'm going to start with Marc. Marc, I think that we've got obviously a very big international audience for the Congress. We have many people around the world. They may not all be familiar with Tamedia's media properties. I wonder if you could just start by giving us a very brief overview of what it is that the Tamedia Group does.
Yeah, happy to do so. Welcome from Zurich. Tamedia dates back to 1893 when the Zurich-based newspaper Tagesanzeiger was founded. Today we are active in German and French-speaking regions of Switzerland and also incorporate countries' leading editorial networks. Our brands include, for example, 24, Basler Zeitung, Der Bund, Berner Zeitung, or Tagesanzeiger and Tribune de Genève. So see French and German-speaking newspapers all over Switzerland.
And what's been your overall approach to paywalls and digital subscriptions? Presumably you've adopted these pretty enthusiastically, have you?
We introduced our paywall in 2014 with a metering model, like 10 articles free and then you have to pay. But we changed that in 2017 to a freemium model. Why? What we found out in user testing is people didn't get this metering model. They even found it unfair that some people may read random content and others didn't. So we changed to this freemium model where between 30 and 40% of all contents are only available for subscribers. It's the content which drives subscriptions, and we saw that mainly the close partnership from our department together with the editorial department brought the success. So it's the editorial team who with passion every day decides which content is premium and which is not, which is a big difference to a metering model where an algorithm or somewhere else is deciding which content is premium or not. In parallel, we also introduced a day pass, which we sold over 250,000 times last year. And this together brought also our growth success then in the long-term subscriptions.
I just want to bring York in for a second to ask him about that point you make there about the close collaboration with the editorial team. York, is that something you see across your client base? Would you define that as a critical success factor?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think you mentioned it already on the slide before. Align your corporation or align your company. I think that is very important. You can't sell good subscriptions if the complete team in your company isn't aligned. So it doesn't work. It's very important to do that. And I think you had it in on one of your last slides.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I guess when you go into I was going to say, when you go into a business to bring the technology piece in, that's one of the things you're looking for.
Absolutely. So we insist nearly, let's say, that all the kickoffs are done with tech and business. It doesn't make sense just to have the kickoffs with the tech teams, because if we are then going live and bring the business in, we need to talk to them. We need to do all these integration projects together with them. We need to define the products. We need to define the prices. We need to define the logic, as Marc said. Is it a metering? Is it a plus model? Is it a hybrid model? So all this has to be decided on, and thereafter the business is driving then the conversion. So they need to know what the software is able to do.
Absolutely. Marc, I want to ask you, we're delighted that we're able to report Tamedia's group number for the first time in this edition. What can you tell us about how that breaks down across your various national and regional properties?
So we don't break it down. What we can say is, as we had end of last year, 80,000 subscribers, and we are now end of July at 110,000 subscribers, because our goal is really to grow every year by 25%. And of course, what we can say is the big growth lied in the big ones, which are Tagesanzeiger and Tribune de Genève. In the regions, really, there is a lot of more potential to grow digitally. But on the other hand side, that's also where the print subscriptions are still really based on loyal users. So what we see is a print user who is more than 4 years a print user, mainly at the a bit outside the cities. They really stay print users for a really long time, and that's something we consider, of course, and where we balance the growth for digital and print. And we see when we have loyal users in print, we let them, of course, be happy with their print. But the growth is mainly now deriving also from target groups which had never a print subscription. And that's also where we focus on, to get new target groups, to make them pay, and to have a simple model as people are used to from Netflix or Spotify or other models.
So it's not purely about conversion, there's a strong acquisition element to the strategy as well. Yeah,
I mean, I mentioned the day pass. The day pass is a fantastic acquisition instrument because people come then 2 or 3 times a month and they pay 2 Swiss francs for a day pass and get used to our content. And we, of course, have all these customers in our database, and we can then make them a really good proposal based on what we see, what they read. So our focus and also the numbers we mentioned before, that is just, of course, the long-term subscriptions for a higher price, not day passes or trial periods. It's really a model where we bring people to long-term subscriptions, and that is we test their different approaches. So far a trial period of 4 weeks is successful in digital, of course, but to lower the burden in this freemium model, the day pass is a very good acquisition instrument, where we saw nearly 30% of day pass customers paid afterwards a long time subscription when we look on a time span of 6 months. And that is really something which brings us new users to our database. Yeah.
That's a phenomenally successful initiative then, as a marketing idea. One of the key things we've seen in the last couple of reports, and I think you've mentioned it a little bit with the contrast in the 2 sets of figures that you mentioned for your own group, the impact of coronavirus on subscriber numbers. We've seen record growth in the New York Times and Telegraph and others. Have you seen something similar in Switzerland?
Yeah, I mean, we had really traffic peaks in mid-March, which are now returning to normal. Users have increased for 85% compared to the previous period. And which is really interesting, users also spend much more time on an article, around 30% increase of average engagement per page, which is really interesting. And it's mainly Corona content, but Corona content which is going more in depth, meaning interactive dashboards, which was really successful, and we rolled out to all titles, where we show different charts, different numbers, and every day people go back there and watch the progress in Switzerland and worldwide. So in short, there were more users, they came more often, and their interest was more targeted. And what makes me happy, of course, as a responsible for revenues, is it's not a completely new audience which will disappear after Corona. We see mostly users converting who were already heavily engaged before, but didn't convert before. So that is why we're also not completely surprised that so far they mostly stay with us, although they mostly bought monthly subscriptions. So what we see is all the people who were really already power users, they now converted and they seem to like it, their subscription. So they most probably also stay with us.
So you've got a pretty good feeling about retention. You think that a lot of these subscribers will stay with you after the crisis is over?
So far, yes, because they know us, they know really what they bought. It's not that they only came because of that. It was the additional plus on top. So they said, yeah, they really do a good job with their dashboards about coronavirus. So they converted after, and they are really using us still a lot. And that's what we monitor closely. We monitor closely the usage of these new subscribers. Is it going down or not, which would be a sign, of course, for churn, and so far that's a good sign.
And you're pretty unique, Tamedia, in that you're one of the few newspaper publishers that publishes in 2 languages and really has a big presence in both. Do you notice any difference in the propensity or the willingness of people to subscribe in French versus German?
Yes. It's much heavier to convert people in the French-speaking part. It's of course the competition price levels from the French-speaking part from France mainly.
Yeah,
is much higher than for Germany. I think that's a personal opinion that people from the French-speaking part are much more oriented where France than German-speaking part versus Germany. So there we see different. Yeah, it's much more. We need to do a much better job in the French-speaking part to make people convert.
York, does that surprise you?
No, I think Marc just said it. I think French-speaking part of Switzerland, very close to the French border, of course, and there you have a direct competition in pricing and newspapers. And yeah, no, it doesn't surprise me.
Makes sense with your experience, absolutely. Marc, I just wanted to ask you about digital marketing. I have got a question from the audience that I'm going to come to about digital marketing in a minute. But first of all, I want to ask you whether the crisis caused you to change the way you're marketing your digital subscriptions.
Yeah, we have refocused all our marketing efforts this year in the direction of content marketing. And as we are now able really with this freemium model to see which content converts, of course, we show the best pieces of content and offer trial subscriptions to read it in detail. So we don't do any more big campaigns where you just say, subscribe to Tagesanzeiger because blah, blah, blah. We really say it's the content. We put the content, for example, the dashboard about Corona or groundbreaking analysis in other in economies or companies. We put that in the center of our promotions, and we guide people directly first to the content and only after to the subscription pages, which brings us really a growth which is tied to the content. And as an example, if you're lately reading a content about a local sports team, we will show you then an exclusive interview some days later on your Facebook feed and try to bring you back to the content, where then you have to register and you're coming in the whole sales funnel, which is then based on marketing automation in the back. So it's really the content which bring people together. And as Jörg also said, one thing is to kick off a project together with your editorial team, but for us it was really key that we made people in the editorial room also feel as they directly drive conversions. So it's not just a group of people making a project together. It's really a feeling that every journalist has to win new subscribers also with what they do. Of course, there are attribution models behind, so it's not just one story. We then look for a longer time period, but that is what we base all our marketing efforts now on.
And the question from the audience is asking about the importance of social media for your digital subscription marketing.
When it comes to re-engaging people, we call them sleepers. So people who are registering, but only reading some content, but not coming back. Of course, we heavily use social media based on content feeds. So we have automated content feeds, which premium stories going in, and based on interest, we then put marketing money on social media in also. We also use an internal other free media platform, which is not Tamedia, but in the group, in the TX group, 20 minutes, to drive, for example, new people based on content to our platforms, if they are sleepers. So yeah, for re-engaging, it's fantastic. Just to put stories on Facebook, we are there, or Instagram or whatever, we are a bit lowering this effort, but for re-engaging, yes.
Now, with this model, you've got this premium model. You've mentioned it there with content and the importance of content as a marketing tool. Can you give us some insight into which types of content bring consumers to you, and which types of content get people to convert?
When I'm thinking back 3 years, we just started with our own assumptions together with the chief editors and the marketing teams. And so we discussed which content should we put behind the premium wall. And of course, we put their practical service information. But for all the rest, we had to really take assumptions. 3 years later, we are happy that what we see is that the stories we love to do or to write are also mostly driving the conversion. So it's investigative relevation, it's personal fate, mostly articles are people in the area of the newspaper where something happened. It can be positive or negative, but just people we have the feeling we know. And for some titles, depending on the DNA of the title and the success of the sports club, it's local sport. For example, in Bern, all the local ice hockey and soccer games have to be put behind the premium paywall. That works fantastic. It doesn't work in Zurich, but that's a Swiss thing here. And of course, practical service information also works as we had the assumption. But we had to take bold assumptions, and we really have now tools in place where every editor, journalist sees every day what brings conversions, what drives, what is bringing new acquisitions, but also, of course, what is read by our subscribers to make them more engaged. And based on that knowledge, we enhance and we drive our further growth.
I've got a bunch of other questions from the audience. A reminder for anybody who's watching, if you want to ask questions to Marc or York, you can do so through the event portal or on Zoom. I'm going to come back to those questions in a minute because I want to ask first you, Marc, and then York, about the magazine industry and magazine industry properties. They've been very reluctant, as an enormous frustration for us as an organization, to embrace paywalls for digital. Why do you think that is, Marc?
Good point. I just spoke about news titles so far, as we made there really huge progress, and we didn't do so far in the magazine business. So magazine is for us also Finanz und Wirtschaft and Bilan, but they are business newspapers, so let's exclude them. What I see is with Schweizer Familie, Swiss Family Magazine, that's really still successful in print. But not at all digital. We introduced a platform with content about family hikes and tours some years ago. We stopped that. We had to stop that. It didn't work at all. And we now put content from this Swiss Family Magazine directly into our big daily newspaper platforms, where it converts nicely. But to put it on a separate platform, which is a niche, which it's really hard, and we didn't do that anymore. The reason lies, from my point of view, mostly in the reading habit. So Schweizer Familie lies at home on a dining table, and somebody from the family is reading it when they have time and so, but it's really difficult to experience that in the digital world. So I believe let's keep it in print, make it really good and valuable in print, and let's keep it as long as it lasts. And I believe it will last longer than we all expect.
Here. I hope so. I'm going to ask you, Marc, to think for a minute, and I'm going to come back to you later to ask you this about 3 pieces of advice for anybody who's going to introduce a paywall. But while you're thinking about that, I'm going to go to York and say, York, first of all, this question I ask you every single time about magazines. Why is it that there are not more magazines with paywalls, do you think?
I would say Marc said already quite some important points. In addition to that, I think the USPs and the offerings in digital in terms of magazines are not there. Print is very heavy. They still earn quite heavily with print. Firstly, secondly, if you take a look at the magazine websites or apps, in the apps, they mostly have e-papers. It is a digital product, or is it a print product? Big question. So what is actually what you're selling there? So it's more one-to-one replica, doesn't work very well. Secondly, the offering is different in magazines than in news. In news, you have a daily action, something happens on a daily basis. It is what you drives to that newspaper is that you have informative daily content, and on the quarterlies or monthlies or bi-weeklies, it's far more difficult to implement a paywall. Nonetheless, I think what I also would like to see is that there is more trial and error, trying, prototyping, testing, putting out some new nice content pieces in the magazine world, and then trying to monetize there as well. I think there's from my perspective, the publishers could try a little bit more on that side.
And it's a lot easier than people think, right? I mean, we spoke about this in the last session, that actually to get started doesn't need to be a massive overhead.
No, I don't think so. I think it's more just trying. But as Marc said, print works still very, very well. The question is, how much do you want to invest in this magazine business, and how much you want to try? But what I feel is that, or what I haven't seen so far, except these two magazines which Marc just said, but that's more nearly newspapers in a specific content area like finance. The openness to prototype and to trial and error, it's a little bit limited, I would say.
We saw in the report, in the numbers in the snapshot, some pretty big increases in subscriber numbers in the last quarter, 15%, 20% in some cases. Is that something you're seeing across the rest of the titles that you work with?
Yeah, I would say absolutely. Marc is one very good example who we work with. The other one, it's absolutely, if I see across all the portfolio we are allowed to work with. Süddeutsche, a very big national newspaper from the south of Germany, just reported in August that they reached their annual target already in August. Wow. Which is 150,000 subscribers. Yeah. Which means in other terms, they doubled their subscription base in just 7 months. So huge success. And you showed a little bit earlier some figures from Axel Springer, and I think they grew as well very, very nicely over the past month. I think about 8-9%. So they increased their base in 7 months by 50,000 subscribers. So yes, there are a couple of nice examples we could mention, and we see an increase in nearly all of our customers.
I mean, that figure for Süddeutsche Zeitung is incredible. I mean, it is absolutely more than double the last time that they.
Yeah, it's great. Yeah. There was a nice interview as well on all media channels from the chief editor, and she was very happy. And I think all the colleagues across the company were happy to reach this target already 4 months before end of year. Yeah, awesome.
That's great. I mean, we do need some good news in this industry at the moment, so that's good news.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Now, the market that you're in, York, with CeleraOne Paywall technology, is very competitive. There's lots of players out there. What do you guys have to do to make sure that you stay ahead of the competition?
Yeah, being open for change, investing in innovation and prototyping, of course, checking on other industries, what other industries are doing, and seeing if you can take something over into our industry. So not just looking at your own, let's say, at your own industry, always checking what others do. And of course, working very closely with our customers. We work with local, we work with regional, we work with national and international. So it's very important for us to work very closely with them and get feedback and impulses and try something with our customers.
Now, I'm gonna ask you to reassure people who may be thinking about coming to you, York. How do you balance the needs of the fact that you're owned by Axel Springer and the needs of that parent company with the needs of your clients?
Good question. We heard that before from some of our customers, or we talked about that. So yes, Axel Springer is our corporate parent, as you said, and it's a strategic investor, and we are very happy about that. On the other side, our business mission is clearly to grow in the market and not in Axel Springer. So we are owned by Axel Springer, but we work completely independently at the market. So we acquire and target and market and sell nationally and internationally. On the one hand, on the other hand, of course, Axel Springer is one of our biggest clients, but not the only big one. So there are a couple of others, like Tamedia as well, a very, very big client of ours, and we make sure that we treat all the same. We have implemented this year an in-house agency, let's say, an account management organization, which takes care of our largest customers, to work with them very closely, because normally the requirements and projects and custom requirements are different to, let's say, more the mainstream. But also for our medium-sized customers, we implemented a customer success organization, which takes care of these guys. So we really try to take care of all our customers equally, and not being, if not, it wouldn't work. I think Tamedia, for instance, or Süddeutsche or NZZ, they would very quickly come to us and say, hey guys, somehow you are our service provider, but you work only for Axel Springer. That doesn't work for us. So we try really to do it as good as we can, equally for everybody.
And we've got a great opportunity to ask one of your clients directly. Marc, is that your experience of it as well?
Sure, I wouldn't say something else. I mean, good. We worked with CeleraOne for a long time already, and it's like always, both sides have to stay innovative and in dialogue, and that is important.
Absolutely, glad to hear it. Jörg, do you think that, we're seeing a big decline in advertising at the moment during this pandemic? Do you think that's leading more publishers to consider the paywall route?
Yeah, I'm absolutely certain about that. We can see that in all the figures. We can hear it in all our talks we have with our customers. Nonetheless, I mean, it's important to see, even though that we have a decline in advertisement revenue currently, it is important to see there are two revenue streams which needs to be taken into account in digital. That's ads and it's subscription. And for both of these revenue streams, the publishers have to have a clear strategic agenda. And probably most of the publishers thought that advertisement is the one and only way to go. But I think you have always to take both streams into account. There are two big streams and both have to be taken into account. Absolutely. Yeah, and we can see that.
Absolutely. I have a couple of questions.
Yeah, and in the end, sorry, James. In the end, it's also the loyalty. Yeah, advertisement doesn't mean the people who are reading on your websites are loyal. It brings you money, of course, and it's good if you have the reach. But as soon as you are only a local one or a regional newspaper, you have difficulties to get the reach to earn the money on the ad stream. So already there, you have to have a good USP, which is local or regional content, and based on that, I'm sure you can convert people into a subscription.
I've got some questions here from the audience, one for you, Jörg, and then one for both of you. The one for you, Jörg, is what's been the level of interest in Subscribe with Google?
I mean, we work quite closely with Google on that. We have a couple of our customers who implemented, so we support that as a part of our offering. We have a couple of customers who implemented that already. I would say it's again an interesting conversion approach, an interesting revenue stream, makes it handy at a certain point. We offer that, but I wouldn't say that now outtake all the other means of converting. I think it's one of the many approaches you could and should consider.
We're going to ask you a buzzword question now. Marc, I'm going to start with you on this one. Do you see a role for AI in companies' paywall strategies in the future?
For sure, there would be chances for that. I first think we need to fix the basics. So as what Jörg said, I mean, we now completely changed our whole checkout from 17 clicks to 2. So now you can buy a subscription with us just to put in, without login, just to put in your email address. You click on PayPal, on Google, Apple Pay, or whatever, I don't care. So we support mainly everything, and you bought the subscription. So I believe still the ladder for growth, or the levers for growth, are in these areas at the moment and not in AI prediction models and so on. Of course, we play around with monitoring churn or other things, but for that, at the moment, I don't need AI. I just see if a user is no more logging in or no more using our page, let's reactivate him or her. So yes, maybe in 2 or 3 years, when my team doesn't know what to do else because we optimized everything, that may be a good approach. For the moment, I'm more in the area of let's fix the basics. So.
That's a good mantra. Fix the basics and then worry about AI. I think we'll adopt that. York, you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, fix the base is a good buzzword or a good term. Absolutely. I would also say it depends a little bit on the size of the publisher. Yeah, they are a publisher. They're a little bit bigger. They have a team. They can work on all these. In the end, it's statistics in the beginning, of course, then deep learning statistics, but it's statistics. And as Marc said, check the statistics you already get today. You have tons of analytics. Start with already analyzing the analytics you already get. That's already a challenge. And based on that, you can already see some quite nice things you could do, re-engage or whatever. In the midterm, I absolutely think that deep learning can help. Yeah? Help on dynamic paywalls, help on dynamic pricings. We see that from other industries. I think it's a very interesting part, and I said it a couple of minutes ago, that being innovative and trying to prototype, and of course it means also checking what other industries are doing and how they earn more money. In that sense, deep learning is very important. Yeah? Deep learning can help and can of course increase somehow some topics, pricing, paywalls, which article is paid, which shouldn't be paid, could also been decided by an engine in the future. But for now, I absolutely agree with Marc. Yeah, check your basics, fix the basics, and you already have today quite some analytics which you can work with without having AI in place.
And York, we have undoubtedly a large number of magazine publishers out there who are thinking about a paywall strategy. If they're not thinking about one, as we've said, they should be. Just explain to them how easy it can be to get started with a paywall.
I mean, I think, again, referring to your slide you had in the end of your presentation, technically, from a software stack, it's a project. It's not a big thing. It depends always on your infrastructure, on your architecture you have in place today, which third-party systems you want to integrate, and so on and so forth. But it's very straightforward. More important is that you have to have a strategy in place. Objectives, key results, what is your USP, what products do you want to offer, what pricing models you need to have behind that. The one is the techniques, but if you don't have the software itself, if you don't have the right strategy in place, the software won't help. That means also work together with your marketing. Treat the new product you want to market as you would treat all the other products. So a product has to be marketed properly. If you don't do that, just setting up a paywall, nobody will come to your page. So if you don't have SEO in place, and by that all the other conversion metrics is afterwards, creating intent and creating conversion, if nobody comes to your website, you won't earn a dime. So I think it's more than just software. And if you just look at the software, yeah, it's a project we need to integrate. Speak to us, of course, but it's not a big thing. It's more that if you don't have the other things in place, the right organization, the right team, the right strategy, then I can help you with the software, but you will be unhappy after a year because the conversion is not what you expected.
Now, York, I'm going to ask you to go away for a minute and think about 3 pieces of advice for optimizing your existing paywall business, and I'll come back to you in a minute and ask you that. I promised I was going to ask Marc for 3 pieces of advice about introducing a paywall. So Marc, give us your 3 key pieces of advice.
Not so surprising. I start with content. It's all about content. So think of your value proposition first with your editorial team. We sat together days and defined with the editorial team for every title a DNA of the title, of the content, what should be the rules of making something premium, which is also explainable for the user. So that's point number one. Point number two, really then implemented with a cross-functional team, but not only for the project, stay within this cross-functional team with people from editorial, marketing, and analytics. So we created a team, a premium team, which is taking care that all the journalists have all the data, but also that based on that data, marketing and sales know what to sell. So really something, create a new team there and go for that. And rule number two, Jörg said it already several times, test, test, test. We took assumptions, but we failed several times. We did new tests and we learn every day. And when we look at Corona, for us, it was really important that we have all these things in place and the test culture. Only when you have that in place, you can react on things like Corona or other things. So there we really had to act quickly to decide, should it be free or not Corona content? How do we deal with it? And so on. And take the assumption, test, and really fail also and adapt on that. And that is something which, from my point of view, I'm now 4 years in the company, took a lot longer than I expected. And that's really something I would put most more in advance in the future for such a project.
Fantastic, thank you. Excellent advice. Jörg, you've had a minute to think about it. What's your 3 pieces of advice for optimizing an existing paywall strategy?
Yes, I tried quickly to put three points down. The first one I would actually pick from Marc again, because it's content and USP. Yeah, even though you need to think about what is your unique selling proposition of your content, and these content might be able to convert. So that is very important. From a tech stack and software stack, it's of course use data. Yeah, use the power of good software to develop your audience towards a paywall. Yeah, don't treat everybody the same. So try really to use the data to personalize the experience, to trigger the paywalls at different times probably. You could also start thinking of first registration, and after a while, if it works well, then first introducing a paywall. It depends on the content, it depends on your audience. So all this, so personal data and personalization, use data and check on personalization. And last but not least, what Marc said also a couple of minutes ago, reduce the effort to get registered and or to pay. Yeah? So if you have 20 clicks and you need to fill out 500 lines to get the subscription, the bounce rate will be high. So really make it the experience for the user as easy as possible. Check on the next Netflixes of the world. It has to be very simple, straightforward, 2 clicks, and you have bought your subscription.
Fabulous. Thank you very much, gentlemen. We're out of time. You've given us the perfect toolkit for how to create and then sustain a paywall. Thank you very much for that. Thank you very much for being part of the Congress this year.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot for having us.
All
Thanks,
those of you
Marc.
that are watching, a reminder that you can watch this session again on Vimeo, or you may be watching it for the first time now on Vimeo. All of the sessions from the Congress are available there for registered delegates and will remain there for a while. I think this session might even also be going on the YouTube channel, accessible to everybody. We'll check on that. We will be doing, of course, another one of these with Jörg and another guest from CeleraOne in the winter when we do the next edition of the Snapshot, so look out for that. A big thank you to Marc. First time we've had Tamedia on one of these sessions. Great to hear from you guys as well. For Congress delegates, we'll be back at 3:15 UK time. That's 4:15 CET and 10 rather in the US. And we'll be interviewing Frederic Cachar, who's the CEO of Editora Globo, one of the biggest media businesses in Brazil, about the coronavirus and the rise of right-wing governments and all sorts of other fascinating subjects that we're going to talk to him about. That will be in about 20 minutes from now. So we will see you then. Until then, goodbye.